Okay, first talk of the day. I realised yesterday when I was talking about this business of symmetry and asymmetry that there are some aspects of it that sound really crazy. So I'm going to start off with the introduction, and then I'm going to come to the first aspect that I think is really crazy, and we'll see how we get on with it. So basically, the idea of symmetry and asymmetry is that one way of thinking about things is as all and same and forever, and another way of thinking about things is in terms of some and different and for a little while. And the crucial kind of insight provided by a chap called Ignacio Mat Blanco was that the subconscious prefers the all same forever way of thinking. And this is not me telling you. I'm advocating for it at the moment, but this is not me telling you the way that it is. This is me suggesting an interesting way of looking at things which might help us understand what's going on in the world. And one of the things that I find really fascinating about this way of looking at the world is that it explains some things that happen really, really often in software development and project management that otherwise I don't think make any sense at all. And so I think that's why it's interesting. It's why it's interesting talking about it. This is a kind of way of thinking about things which I haven't seen anybody else talk about. Certainly, I haven't seen anybody else talk about it at all. Actually, it is kind of connected to Daniel Kahneman and thinking fast and slow. But here's the thing. The one thing that when I was talking yesterday, I thought maybe this is a bit of a stretch. People aren't really going to believe this. So I started talking about different aspects of project management. That this kind of difference in thinking between same and all and forever and some and different and for a short space of time. One of the differences that I find really interesting, and that's kind of the way that this impacts time. And also, when I was thinking about this today, I realised that I have two little comedy bits about time that when I'm doing a show I can include in this. One of them, one of these things that I want to talk about is probably I need to do some editing to do it, but it's a Michael Caine bit, or I've seen Michael Caine use it, which is what's the most important thing about comedy. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this with my headphones on, and then I'm going to take my headphones and my glasses off, and then I'm going to say what is the most important thing about comedy. Okay, right, well, let's do this. I don't know. What is the most important thing about comedy? Timing. When that's edited, that will look hilarious. And the other kind of joke that I have to do with time is that they say there's no time like the present, and some people say there's no present like time, but it's extremely difficult to wrap. And actually, wrapping time is what we're talking about here. That the idea of things having an extension in time, of like happening for a certain amount of time. Because the interesting thing about symmetrical thinking, when it relates to time, is that anything that is thought about symmetrically lasts forever. So when we connect this with project management and the fact that we're trying to deliver something, this is the way people behave. I haven't quite unpacked how you described it logically, but this is the way people behave. That you have the idea for a project, and then people behave in a way as if that already exists. That getting the idea was the really tricky bit, and then actually delivering that idea is just straightforward. It's a mere matter of programming, or even some cases people treat it as if it's just a matter of typing. Now, this sounds crazy, but that is the way that kind of people believe that, like, once the idea is there, then it somehow already exists. All we have to do is kind of somehow dig it out and unearth it. And part of the way that they behave as a result of this is that they assume that kind of the project should just happen as fast as possible. And in fact, it's not even as fast as possible, it's as fast as impossible. Because when you communicate the things that are actually limiting the time that it takes to do something, they just feel very, very frustrated by these things. And those that are like actually as fast as possible. So one of the things I talk about in the book is how fast can you drive across London. If you want to go from my house in East London to, let's say, Ealing Broadway in far West London, how fast can you drive? Well, there's a theoretical speed that you can drive, there's a legal speed that you can drive, and then there's the actual speed that you're going to manage when driving across London. And that actual speed is not something that people are terrifically interested in when they're wanting their software. It's much more near either the theoretical speed of like what's the absolute fastest they can go, or even faster than that. There's a count of how fast software can go, which is extremely controversial, but I'll talk about it now, which is called velocity. And doing various things, you can put together a score for like the speed that your project is moving at. And the only response to that number that I've got from senior stakeholders and people who want the project is, why can't it be double? In fact, that's not the only response I've got. I've got another one as well, which is, how does that compare to another team? And the answer is it doesn't. There's no comparison. They're doing a completely different project. How on earth could it compare? So I'm getting worked up about this, and the way that I present this, I shouldn't be getting worked up about it, but it's so basically the story I'm telling you is like, why am I telling you this? Why am I telling you this, doctor? Why am I telling you about symmetry and asymmetry? I'm telling you about symmetry and asymmetry because it explains some weird things that people do. And one of them is this thing about, once they've imagined the project, that somehow it exists, and so they behave as if it should take no time at all. They also behave as if it should cost nothing. Because once they've thought of it, then they've thought of it, right, and it exists. Why should it cost anything? They're kind of very resentful of it costing anything. The other thing that is kind of weird here is they either act as if it should cost nothing, or as if money is no object. Like for some organisations that have lots of money, they just don't worry about how much it costs. But again, kind of like these are kind of strange behaviours unless you think about things in terms of symmetry, that the thing already exists. Once you've had the idea that it already exists. And this kind of idea of symmetry also explains another very strange piece of behaviour, which you see all the time. I mean, this is just pretty much, I'd be astounded when I don't see this, which is, so part of the kind of idea of Agile is that you prioritise the list of things that you want to do on a project. You take the most important things, or the riskiest things, or the things that generate the most customer value. You might have some kind of way of figuring out what those are. But you take that list and you do some things before you do other things. You have to have an order. It's just the way the world works. You can't do everything at the same time. And asking people, senior people, to come up with that order, to prioritise that list, is, in my experience, nearly impossible. Because again, like kind of, there's these instant answers to that kind of question. It's like, well, which of these things could you prioritise as first? And the answer is, I don't want to prioritise them at all. I want all of them. And again, I think this really connects to this symmetrical way of seeing things, that all of this stuff already exists. And also, like the other thing about this kind of idea of the symmetrical way of seeing time is things that don't exist will never exist. Things coming into being is not something that is associated with that symmetrical way of seeing time. And so I think that's kind of a really interesting way of seeing things. And you can explain most of symmetry and asymmetry by talking about some and all, different and same, and forever and for just now. But there is this other aspect of symmetry that I think is really important, which is this idea that statements and words and pictures and sounds, conversations, can fully dictate what needs to happen in a piece of software, in the actual product. And this is something that almost nobody ever talks about. But again, like it's really, once you kind of get the idea, it's really straightforward, and also it really explains why we have so much difficulty in projects. And so, like, the example that I've used in the book is that, like, the kind of classic English phrase, the cat sat on the mat, or the cat sits on the mat. Let's keep it in the present for now. So the cat sits on the mat. If you've got a mat and you've got a cat, you can say the cat sits on the mat. But when you're saying that, those are noises, those are vibrations in the air, those are movements of your vocal cords. Those aren't actually a cat and a mat. There's some kind of agreement that's been made that those noises will refer to things out in the world. And that reference, that aboutness, is called intentionality. And so it's not just that we agree that certain vibrations, noises, describe the situation where a cat sits on the mat. We also have an agreement about certain kind of squiggles on pieces of paper, that they also adequately describe this business of cats sitting on mats. And we can also draw pictures. So we could draw a drawing, we can paint an artwork that shows a cat sitting on a mat, and we can say that it reflects the world. But that business of how things that aren't the world point at the world and are about the world is not a straightforward thing. It's not a straightforward thing at all. And the symmetry and the subconscious nature of symmetry might make us think that it is a straightforward thing, that we can just write some things down, we can describe what we want, and then some people will just get it. That once we've had the idea, that's the hard bit, and kind of actually realizing it in the world is not difficult. Of course, we can write all sorts of things that aren't possible in the physical world. We can write the cat hovers over the mat, or the cat flies away on the mat. These are easy things to write. These are very difficult things to do in reality. But the other thing about this is that if you don't think that that's problematic, if you have this symmetrical, subconscious view that kind of writing things and then like aligning them in the world is straightforward, you're going to have all sorts of trouble with projects, because at some point you're going to have to decide that the thing that was written down, the squiggles, actually match the world well enough. And that well enough thing is a very asymmetrical, not all, not same, not forever type thing. It's like, well, yeah, this will do for now. And again, this is a very difficult concept to negotiate and deal with in projects. But if we don't do that, if we don't kind of understand that there's a difference between the statements and the actual thing that's in the world, then we'll struggle. Incidentally, there's another aspect of this, which is the idea that all of this thing can be adequately documented as well. We can write documents for all sorts of different purposes, but the idea that we can fully document the thing that we've created in the world is extremely unlikely. We're not going to do that. So this is why I'm talking about symmetry and asymmetry. It's because it helps us understand a whole bunch of peculiar behaviour. And coming back to kind of what the title of this book is, Delivering the Impossible, it comes back to, I completely lost my train of thought there. Can edit that out, or you can just see me completely blanking. Well, it basically explains some of the ways in which stating a project can make it impossible. And it offers, and this is the crucial thing, I always forget when I start doing this. to drink some water. The other thing is that, last minute now, it's too long now, the other crucial thing is that it explains some ways that we can approach this so we can get rid of some of that symmetry and we can start to think about these things asymmetrically, and that holds out the prospect of actually being able to deliver things, being able to make them possible.